Listen, this message is not for everyone. If this video has somehow found you today, there is a reason. I don't believe that every reading is meant for every person, but if you felt drawn here, whether it was the title, the thumbnail, or simply a feeling you couldn't explain, then I want you to stay with me, because there is someone in your energy who is younger than you. Now, before you immediately think, this can't be about me, just allow yourself to listen. Tarot isn't here to predict your future with absolute certainty. Instead, it reflects emotional patterns, hidden motivations, and the psychological journey unfolding beneath the surface. And the first card that appeared is the Six of Wands. This is fascinating because many people see this card as a symbol of victory or recognition, but psychologically, it speaks about something much deeper. Someone wants to be seen. Someone desperately wants to feel worthy. The person I'm picking up on has spent a long time trying to prove themselves not only to the world, but to themselves. They carry this quiet belief that they always have something to prove before they deserve love. And strangely enough, meeting you intensified that feeling. Because you're older, whether it's by a few years or more, they naturally compare themselves to you. They see your maturity, your confidence, your emotional experience, and instead of feeling inspired immediately, they feel intimidated. They wonder, will they think I'm too immature? Am I successful enough? Can I really offer someone like them the relationship they deserve? What's interesting is that they rarely admit these thoughts out loud. In fact, most people around them would never guess they feel this insecure. On the outside, they may appear confident, charming, playful, even fearless. But inside, they're constantly measuring themselves against an invisible standard. And every conversation with you leaves them thinking about what they should have said differently. Every smile you gave them becomes something they replay later. Every compliment you offered stays in their mind much longer than you realize, because your opinion matters more than you know. The Six of Wands isn't showing arrogance. It's showing someone who wants your respect before they ever ask for your heart. And that changes everything. Because what happens next isn't driven by age. It's driven by the silent battle between admiration and self-doubt, a battle they're fighting every single day without you even realizing it. The next card explains why this internal conflict becomes impossible for them to hide, and why one unexpected moment changes the entire direction of this connection. The next card is the Wheel of Fortune. Now, this is really interesting because many people look at this card and immediately think it's about luck or sudden change, but psychologically it often represents something much quieter than that. It represents the moment when someone realizes they can't keep repeating the same emotional pattern forever. And I feel like that's exactly where this younger person is. You see, admiration can only stay hidden for so long before it begins asking difficult questions. Because every time they walk away from you, every time they tell themselves they should stop thinking about you, every time they convince themselves that the age difference means they should simply move on, they somehow find themselves right back where they started, thinking about you again, wondering what you're doing, wondering whether you ever think about them, wondering if they missed an opportunity they may never get back. That's what this wheel represents. Not destiny. A cycle. A psychological cycle that keeps bringing the same emotions back to the surface because those emotions were never truly understood in the first place. What's fascinating is that they probably tried to explain these feelings away. They told themselves it was only attraction. Then they thought perhaps it was admiration. Then they convinced themselves it would disappear with time. But instead, the feelings became quieter and somehow stronger, because emotions that are ignored don't always disappear. Sometimes they simply become harder to explain. This is someone who notices little things about you without even trying. The way you carry yourself, the way you stay calm when other people become emotional, the way you listen instead of immediately speaking, the way you seem comfortable with who you are, those qualities affect them much more deeply than they would ever admit. Not because they want to become you, but because being around you makes them see the version of themselves they wish they already were, and that realization is uncomfortable. Because instead of feeling equal, they begin feeling as though they're still trying to catch up. Now imagine carrying that feeling every single time you speak with someone. You'd probably start questioning everything you say. You'd replay conversations afterward. You'd wonder whether you sounded immature, whether you talked too much, whether you should have acted differently, whether they noticed how nervous you actually were. And that's exactly what keeps happening here. From your perspective, they may simply seem unpredictable. One day, they're warm and engaged. The next, they become distant. Not because their feelings disappeared, but because every meaningful interaction forces them to confront insecurities they've spent years hiding even from themselves. And that's where this emotional cycle quietly begins to change. Because the next card doesn't show someone losing interest. It shows the exact reason admiration slowly transforms into avoidance, and why they suddenly begin protecting themselves from the very connection they secretly want most. Two of Cups. This is where the psychology becomes even more interesting. Many people see the Two of Cups as a card of love, but psychologically it often represents emotional reciprocity, the quiet realization that someone may see you in ways you've never believed about yourself. And that's exactly what frightens them. The closer they feel to you emotionally, the more exposed they become. Admiration is safe from a distance. You can imagine possibilities without ever risking disappointment, but genuine emotional connection asks for something more. It asks for honesty. It asks you to let someone see the parts of yourself you've spent years trying to hide or improve. For someone who constantly feels they have something to prove, that can feel overwhelming. Their withdrawal isn't a sign they've stopped caring. More often, it's the opposite. The more meaningful this connection becomes, the more cautious they grow with every word, every message, every interaction. Inside their mind, questions begin to repeat. What if I disappoint them? What if I'm not as confident as I seem? What if they expect more than I can give right now? Notice that none of these fears are really about you. They're about how they see themselves. When someone secretly places another person on a pedestal, they almost always place themselves beneath it. That's the imbalance this card quietly reveals, not between you and them, but between who they truly are and who they believe they must become before they deserve you. That's why they sometimes disappear after conversations that actually went well. From your perspective, everything felt natural. You laughed together, the conversation flowed, there were moments when it genuinely seemed like you understood each other. But afterward, instead of feeling relieved, they replay every detail. They wonder if they shared too much, sounded inexperienced, appeared immature, or if you notice the nervousness hidden beneath their smile. The moments you remember as effortless are often the moments they remember most intensely, because they aren't simply remembering the conversation, they're analyzing themselves inside it. Eventually, that constant self-analysis becomes emotionally exhausting, so they create distance. Not because they want less of you, but because they believe protecting themselves from possible rejection will hurt less than discovering they were never enough. And yet, the Two of Cups suggests that this pattern cannot continue forever. Something unexpected begins to interrupt that belief. A single moment one they never saw coming quietly shifts the emotional balance between the two of you. It becomes the first time they begin to question whether the fear they've carried has ever truly reflected reality at all. The next card is the Magician. This is where everything begins to shift in a way most people never notice. I don't think this younger person realized how much influence you had over them until one seemingly ordinary moment. It probably wasn't a dramatic conversation or a grand romantic gesture. It may have been something as simple as encouraging them, listening without judgment, laughing at something they said, remembering a small detail they mentioned weeks before, or simply looking at them in a way that made them feel understood. What you may not realize is that the moments that change someone's life are often the ones that feel completely ordinary to the person creating them. While you're simply being yourself, someone else is quietly attaching deep meaning to that interaction. That's what the Magician reveals here. Not manipulation, not magic, but awareness. For perhaps the first time, they began seeing themselves differently because of the way you treated them. You never spoke to them as though they were too young. You never reduced them to their age. Instead, you responded to who they truly were. And they never forgot that someone who has spent years believing they must earn respect doesn't easily forget the person who offered it naturally. Ironically, this didn't make them instantly more confident. It had almost the opposite effect. Because once they realized your opinion genuinely mattered, they became afraid of losing it. And that's a deeply human response. Confidence and insecurity often exist inside the same person. Someone can appear capable in every other area of life, yet become unexpectedly uncertain around the one person whose opinion carries real emotional weight. That's exactly what's happening here. The more accepted they felt by you, the more aware they became of everything they believed was still unfinished about themselves. their hesitation, their inexperience, their habit of second-guessing every decision, not because you pointed out those flaws, but because your kindness became a mirror. And mirrors don't only reflect our strengths, they also reveal the places where we still believe we need to grow. So after one conversation, one smile, or one simple act of understanding, something inside them quietly changed. They stopped asking themselves whether they liked you. That answer was already clear. Instead, a much harder question took its place. What kind of person do I need to become before I can truly stand beside them without feeling afraid? And once that question took root, walking away from these feelings was no longer as easy as pretending they didn't exist. The next card is the Emperor. It represents the need to feel secure before allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And that's exactly where this younger person finds themselves. Ever since they started asking who they would need to become to stand beside you, they've become increasingly aware of everything they believe they're missing. Not because you ever made them feel inadequate, but because they're comparing themselves to the version of you they've created in their own mind. The truth is, we rarely compare ourselves fairly. We compare our private struggles to someone else's visible strengths. So while they notice your confidence, they don't see your doubts. They admire your emotional maturity without realizing how much life experience may have shaped it. Instead, they quietly tell themselves they already know who they are. I'm still figuring myself out. Once that belief settles in, every decision becomes heavier. They've probably imagined reaching out to you far more times than you'd ever guess. They've written messages, then deleted them. Thought about starting conversations, only to convince themselves it wasn't the right time. They've imagined asking you to spend time together, then decided they should wait until they felt more successful, more established, more confident. But the difficult part is that those conditions never truly arrive. Because perfection keeps moving. As soon as one insecurity fades, another quietly takes its place. That's how overthinking works. It doesn't remove uncertainty, it simply gives it a new voice. Eventually, they begin believing that waiting is the responsible choice, that staying silent somehow protects both of you. Because if they never take the risk, they never have to face the possibility that this connection meant more to them than it did to you. For someone whose self-worth already feels fragile, that's a painful possibility. So instead, they try to regain control. They focus on work, personal goals, independence, and becoming the kind of person they believe you deserve. The irony is that the harder they try to stop thinking about you, the more every achievement reminds them why they started changing in the first place. Beneath all the planning, self-improvement, and excuses about timing, the feeling never actually disappears. It simply becomes quieter, more disciplined, and more carefully hidden. But the Emperor also suggests something important. No amount of preparation can eliminate every fear. Soon, something outside their carefully controlled plans begins to shift. And for the first time, they realize that life doesn't always wait until we feel completely ready. Oh, Queen of Swords. This card represents something more subtle than most people realize. It represents perception. More specifically, the stories we create about someone before we've ever asked whether those stories are actually true. And that's exactly what's happening here. This younger person doesn't simply see you as older. They see you as emotionally clear, someone who knows what they want, someone who has no time for uncertainty, someone who would recognize hesitation immediately. Whether that's true isn't really the point. Psychologically, people don't respond only to reality. They respond to the version of reality they've created inside their own minds. That's why outside pressures suddenly feel so much heavier. Maybe they're still building their career. Maybe they're trying to become financially secure. Maybe they feel expected to have life completely figured out before pursuing something meaningful. Or perhaps they've heard enough opinions about age differences that they've quietly started believing them too. None of these pressures erase their feelings. They simply give those feelings more reasons to stay hidden. Every time they think about reaching out, another thought quickly follows. Not yet. I should wait. I need to become more established. I need to have something better to offer. Notice how the finish line keeps moving? Not because they don't care, but because believing they need to become more feels safer than risking vulnerability today. The Queen of Swords reminds us that self-judgment often borrows the voice of imagined expectations. They assume you'll expect perfection. They assume you'll notice every flaw they see in themselves. They assume you'll judge them by standards that may exist only inside their own thoughts. and those assumptions quietly shape every decision they make. The irony is that while they're trying to protect themselves from possible disappointment, they're also creating distance from the very person who has made them feel understood. The connection hasn't faded. If anything, it has grown stronger. But now it exists alongside practical concerns, timing, stability, and whether two people at different stages of life can truly meet in the middle. Those questions become difficult to ignore. Yet beneath all that noise, something else is changing. A quieter voice has begun to grow. It no longer asks whether these feelings are real. Instead, it asks a far more important question. How much longer will I let fear make every decision for me? And once someone begins asking that question, their emotional journey starts moving in a direction they never expected. Four of Cups. The moment a person begins questioning the beliefs that have quietly controlled them for years. And I think that's exactly where this younger person has arrived. After replaying every conversation, comparing themselves to you again and again, convincing themselves they needed to become someone different before they could deserve this connection, a small question begins to appear. What if I've been measuring myself unfairly all along? It's not a dramatic realization. It's a quiet one. The kind that grows slowly, over time. Real confidence rarely arrives all at once. It doesn't erase fear overnight or silence every insecurity. Instead, it changes how someone responds to those fears. They've started noticing something they couldn't see before. Every time they imagined you judging them, it was often their own inner voice speaking. Every time they assumed you expected perfection, they were describing the expectations they placed upon themselves. That's not an easy truth to accept, because it means the greatest obstacle was never simply the age difference. It wasn't timing. It wasn't circumstance. It was the story they kept repeating inside their own mind. The Four of Cups asks someone to pause long enough to notice the difference between reality and assumption. Instead of asking, am I enough for them? They slowly begin asking, why have I spent so long believing I wasn't enough? That's a completely different question, and different questions lead to different answers. What's fascinating is that emotional maturity doesn't come from pretending to have everything figured out. It comes from allowing yourself to be seen before you feel completely ready, because vulnerability isn't the reward that comes after confidence. More often, it's the experience that creates confidence. The younger person is beginning to understand that. Slowly, carefully, they're becoming less interested in proving themselves and more interested in being genuine, less focused on appearing perfect, and more curious whether authenticity matters more than perfection ever could. That doesn't mean every fear disappears. Old habits rarely fade that quickly, but something has shifted. For the first time, hope is beginning to speak just a little louder than fear. And once that happens, it's difficult to return to the person you used to be, because one final realization is quietly approaching. A realization that changes not only how they see themselves, but how they've understood this entire connection from the very beginning. Prince of Swords. This card represents something that happens before action ever begins. It's the moment when a person realizes the story they've been telling themselves no longer makes sense. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. For a long time, this younger person believed the age difference was the reason they felt afraid. It seemed like the obvious explanation. You're older. You appear more experienced, more settled. So they told themselves, that's why I'm hesitating. But the more they've reflected, the harder that explanation has become to believe. Because if age were truly the problem, why do they feel calmer every time they imagine speaking to you honestly? Why does every meaningful interaction leave them feeling hopeful instead of discouraged? Why has admiration quietly become something much deeper? Sometimes we blame circumstances because they're easier to face than vulnerability. It's easier to say, the timing isn't right. I'm too young. I need to become more. Than to admit, this person matters more to me than I expected. That's a very different kind of truth. And once someone recognizes it, everything begins to look different. The Prince of Swords isn't showing someone who suddenly becomes fearless. It's showing someone who becomes more honest. They begin understanding that emotional readiness isn't measured by age. It's measured by the willingness to let another person see what is real. Two people can be the same age and still be worlds apart emotionally, while two people with years between them can sometimes understand each other remarkably well. That's why this connection has stayed in their thoughts. It was never asking them to become older. It was asking them to become more authentic, less concerned with appearing impressive, more willing to be genuine, less focused on proving their worth, more willing to believe that worth doesn't have to be earned through perfection. That realization changes something important. Admiration may inspire growth. But courage begins the moment someone decides they no longer want fear writing every chapter of their story. This hasn't happened overnight. It's unfolded little by little. Conversation after conversation, reflection after reflection, question after question, until they find themselves standing before one final choice. They can continue protecting themselves by staying silent, or they can finally discover whether the connection they've carried so quietly has been real all along. And once that choice becomes clear, remaining silent becomes far more difficult than speaking from the heart. Oh, Eight of Wands. This card represents something much more meaningful than simple movement. Psychologically, it represents the moment when thoughts that have been building quietly for a long time become impossible to contain. And I think that's where this younger person has slowly arrived. After enough self-reflection, a person eventually becomes more tired of hiding than they are afraid of being seen. Not because every fear has disappeared. Not because every insecurity has been resolved. But because something else has become stronger. Their honesty. Emotional breakthroughs rarely announce themselves. They don't usually arrive through dramatic speeches or grand declarations. More often, they happen in silence. Someone simply wakes up one day and realizes, I've been waiting for a version of myself that may never exist. They begin to understand that confidence was never supposed to come first. Perfection wasn't supposed to come first. The first step was always honesty. That's what the Eight of Wands is pointing toward. Not impulsive action, but emotional momentum. Every conversation they've replayed, every insecurity they've questioned, every belief they've challenged, every moment they wondered whether they were enough, has quietly been leading them here to a place where they no longer want fear to speak louder than what they genuinely feel. What's fascinating is that authentic communication doesn't begin when someone knows exactly what to say. It begins when they stop pretending they have nothing to say at all. And that's a profound shift. They're no longer trying to become the perfect version of themselves before allowing you to know them. They're beginning to understand that genuine connection has never depended on flawless timing. It depends on two people being willing to meet each other, honestly. That realization changes everything. Not because it guarantees a particular outcome. Tarot doesn't make promises like that. But because it transforms the way someone approaches the connection itself. Instead of asking, how can I avoid getting hurt? They slowly begin asking, how can I be true to what I'm feeling? Those are two very different mindsets. And they lead to very different choices. If you've been listening from the beginning of this reading, you may have noticed something. These cards were never really about the age difference. They've been about self-worth, about vulnerability, about the quiet journey from admiration to authenticity. And that's why this turning point feels so significant, because the final card isn't here to predict what happens next. It's here to reveal what this entire journey has been trying to teach about this connection from the very beginning. And Six of Pentacles. It's really about balance. It's the moment someone stops asking, what do I have to become before I'm worthy of love? And begins asking, what can I honestly bring into this connection exactly as I am? That's a profound shift, because everything in this reading has quietly been leading here. The Six of Wands revealed someone searching for worth. The Emperor showed why they believed they had to become stronger before allowing themselves to be vulnerable. The Queen of Swords uncovered the assumptions they made about you. The Four of Cups encouraged them to question those beliefs. The Prince of Swords revealed that the age difference was never the true obstacle. The Eight of Wands showed how honesty slowly became stronger than fear. And now, the Six of Pentacles brings all of those lessons together. Healthy connection isn't built when one person feels they must constantly prove themselves. It's built when two people are willing to meet each other as equals. Not equal in age, not equal in experience, but equal in honesty, equal in respect, equal in emotional presence. That's the lesson this younger person has been learning all along. That admiration doesn't have to become self-doubt. That growth doesn't require self-rejection. And that caring for someone doesn't mean becoming someone else first. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't saying the perfect words. It's allowing another person to see the imperfect truth. Tarot doesn't tell us exactly what another person will choose, and it doesn't promise a particular ending. What it can reflect is the emotional journey unfolding beneath the surface. If this reading resonated with you, perhaps the most important question isn't whether someone younger than you will eventually speak. Perhaps it's this: have you ever underestimated the quiet impact you've had on someone else's life simply by being yourself? Sometimes our kindness, our patience, our authenticity give another person permission to believe in themselves. Maybe that's the real story these cards have been telling from the very beginning. Not a story about age, but a story about self-worth, about vulnerability, about emotional timing, and about the quiet courage it takes for two people to meet without pretending to be anyone other than who they truly are. If this reading spoke to your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments which card resonated with you the most, and if you enjoy reflective, psychology-inspired tarot readings like this one, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need this message today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next reading.